Assalamualaikum and good morning. I bid to Mr. Hafiz and my fellow classmates. I am Nurul Izzati binti Zahari and I am going to explain to you guys my English literature lesson, which I implement the dramatic technique poetry recital in my lesson. So this is the scheme of work that I refer to when I develop my lesson. It is a textbook-based lesson. And the lesson is for Form 2 students with level of proficiency A2 high. And the main focus skill is literature in action. The theme for my lesson is people and culture, and the topic is My Dad, My Hero. The duration for my lesson is 60 minutes, and the content standard and the main skill is literature in action 5.1, which is engage with, respond to, and interpret a variety of literary text types. And the complementary skills is speaking 2.1, which is communicate information, ideas, opinions, and feelings intelligibly on familiar topics. The learning standard in this lesson, the main skill is literature in action 5.1.1, which is explain in simple language connections between characters, places, or events in text and their own lives. And for the complementary skills, it is speaking 2.1.5, which is express opinions or feelings about character or personality. The lesson objectives for my lesson is by the end of this lesson, my students should be able to discuss and express their opinions on the poem My Hero. The second one is to complete the worksheet on the poem My Hero within the time given. And the third one is to read the poem with appropriate tones and correct pronunciation. It is a face-to-face lesson, and the poem that I'll be using in my class is My Hero by Willis Hall. This is the poem text that I have prepared, and it is actually adopted from the Form 2 literature textbook. So as for my lesson, I am going to use the task-based approach, and there are a few stages such as pre-lesson, lesson development, which I divide into 3 stages, which are pre-task, task, as well as post-task, and then I'm going to proceed with the post-lesson. So without further ado, let's get into the stages of my lesson. So the first stage is pre-lesson, and the duration is 5 minutes. So in this stage, after I grade and explain the lesson objectives to my students, I will give the student a plain mind map template, as you can see in the slide, the first picture. And then I am going to ask my students to write their hero names at the center and fill the other branches of my map with their hero's characteristics. I'll be giving them 2 minutes to complete the worksheet, and after 2 minutes, I'm going to ask a student or 2 students to read what they have written on the worksheet. As you can see in the second picture, that is why I expected my students to write on their worksheet. So the rationale behind this pre-lesson activity is because according to Moore 2005, he stated that an interactive pre-lesson stage can gain students' undivided attention, stimulate their interest, and create the conditions for the information that follows. The next stage is lesson development, which is the first stage of my task-based approach, which is the pre-task, and the duration for this stage is 15 minutes. So here I am going to model the reading by reading the poem stanza by stanza. And while I do that, I am going to ask my students to follow after me during the model reading. because I want to help my students with the pronunciation. And after that, I'm going to help them with the definition of the words in the poem, especially unfamiliar words that they couldn't understand in the poem. After I have explained the definition of the unfamiliar words, I am going to discuss the meaning of each stanza with my students, as well as the literary elements such as persona, themes, and moral values. Before I give them a handout, which I have prepared beforehand, I am going to discuss their opinions on the poem first. So the materials that I'll be using in this stage are literature textbook as well as notes on definition. So the rationale behind this model reading activity is because according to Treelist in 1979, he stated that reading aloud to children stimulates their interest, emotional development, and imagination, as well as their desire to read. It also broadens their life and gives them a sense of purpose and identity. He also stated that reading aloud to youngsters also helps them strengthen their language abilities and increase their listening skills. So this is the notes that I'll be giving to them after I have discussed the definition as well as their opinions on the poem, and this notes is actually to help them to understand more on the definition or the meanings underlying behind each stanza of the poem. Next, we are going to move on to the second stage, which is task in the lesson development, and the duration for this stage is also 15 minutes. So the materials that I'll be using here is worksheet. So in this stage, I'll be giving my students the worksheet, and I'm going to ask them to complete their worksheet individually. So I'm going to give my students 10 minutes to answer the worksheet, and after 10 minutes, I'm going to discuss the answers with the students. So the reason why I did worksheet in this stage is because according to Crumbach and Harms in 2008, they stated that worksheets are beneficial in assisting students aged 11 until 15 in acquiring knowledge. Worksheets can be used by teachers as an assessment tool to evaluate students' prior knowledge, learning outcomes, and learning processes, and they can also be used by students to track their own learning progress. This is the worksheet that I'll be giving my students to complete within 10 minutes. And after that, I'm going to move on to the next stage, which is the post-task. And the duration for this stage is 20 minutes. So here I am going to ask the students to sit in a group of 5 because the poem has five stanzas. So I plan that when I do the poetry recital, one student is going to read one stanza in the group as a group. Okay, so I'm going to ask for a volunteer from each group to draw the mood cards that I have prepared. And I am going to explain to the students that they are going to read the poem, which is the poetry recital, using the mood that they have drawn beforehand. And I am going to give marks and pick a winner, and I will announce the winner in the next class. And to ask my students for the poetry recital session, I am going to ask the students to volunteer or call group by group to the front. So the rationale behind this activity is according to Michalko in 2012. She stated that spoken word poetry, or actually on the other word poetry recital encourages children to break free from internal conflicts and share their feelings with their peers and teacher by creating a socially just classroom environment and empowering them to speak their minds freely. These are the mood cards that I have prepared, which I am going to ask my students to draw, and whoever gets the mood given by me, they are going to read the poem using that mood. For example, if group 1 gets confused, so they are going to read the poem using the confused mood and tone. So moving on to the last stage of my lesson, which is the post lesson. The duration for this stage is 5 minutes. So here I am going to give my students a handout, and I am going to play a song by Mariah Carey entitled Hero. And I am going to ask my students to fill in the blanks while listening to the song in order to complete the task, because the task that I have prepared is actually the fill in the blank task. And after that, I am going to read the answers for the students. And before I end my lesson, I am going to recap my lesson. Before I end my lesson, I am going to recap the lesson and look at the lesson objective, whether I have achieved the objectives or not. So the materials that I'll be using in this stage is worksheet, and the rationale behind this activity is according to Rose in 2001, Vandergriff in 2007, and Kurita in 2012. They stated that listening is a significant skill to develop in second language learning. So this is the worksheet, the listening worksheet that I have prepared for my students. And when I play the song Hero by Mariah Carey, they are going to listen to the lyrics and fill in the blanks. That's it from me. Thank you.